Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling a pretty big question.
Oh, yeah.
Why does humanity even need saving in the first place?
That is the question, isn't it?
I was looking at this source you shared that approaches this from a spiritual angle,
Right.
a specifically Christian one.
Okay.
And honestly, I got to say, I'm really curious to see what we uncover here.
Well, what I find interesting about the source is that it doesn't start by, like jumping right into, all the
Yeah,
problems.
right?
It kind of paints this picture first of humanity in its original state.
Oh, okay.
Almost like a utopia,
Okay.
talking about perfect harmony with God and pure thoughts, all that good stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, that doesn't really sound like the world we're living in right now.
No, not at all.
So how do we go from that, ideal to kind of all this?
Well, the source uses the term sin,
Okay.
and you can kind of think about it like this.
Okay.
You're faced with a choice.
Okay.
And, deep down what's right, but you just don't do it.
Right.
That disconnect.
Yeah.
That's what this source is getting at with sin.
Okay.
And the result of that is separation from God.
Okay.
Kind of like a spiritual misalignment.
So it's less about being bad and more about just being
Yeah.
out of sync.
Exactly.
It's like trying to tune a radio and it's just static.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
The source even suggests that, those feelings of emptiness we all have.
Yeah.
And that kind of, not being quite sure what our purpose is
Yeah.
could be a sign of that disconnect.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's pretty relatable.
Yeah.
But if we're all kind of out of tune with that, divine signal,
Right.
how do we get back on track?
Well,
This source mentions Jesus, right?
right.
What's his role in all of this?
The source describes Jesus as the bridge between humanity and God,
Okay.
the one who repairs that disconnect
Mm-hmm.
that's caused by sin. It's
Yeah.
like closing a circuit and letting that connection flow again.
And I'm guessing that's where this whole born again thing comes in.
Exactly.
Is that about like suddenly, being a perfect person?
Not exactly.
Okay.
The source actually pushes back against that idea.
Okay.
This idea that you can just willpower yourself into being good.
Right.
It's more like, your motivations get a total reset.
Okay.
Like you start wanting different things.
Right.
Maybe better things you didn't even care about before.
So real change is coming from somewhere deeper,
Mhm.
outside of ourselves.
Yeah, that's what the source is arguing.
Interesting.
And it even uses this, pretty strong quote. The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them because they are spiritually discerned.
Oh.
So basically it's saying we need a new way of seeing, a new way of understanding
Okay.
to even grasp these spiritual concepts.
It's like needing to learn a whole new language before you can even begin to understand a culture, right?
Exactly. But once you learn that language, the possibilities are pretty much limitless.
Okay, so I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
So we have this original state of harmony.
Right.
Sin kind of enters the picture,
Mm-hmm.
causes this disconnect,
Mm-hmm.
and now we need this spiritual rebirth to kind of reconnect.
Yeah.
But the source also talks about consequences
Yes, it does.
for rejecting this whole idea of redemption.
Right.
And that's where things start to get
Yeah.
a little heavy, don't they?
It's true. The source doesn't really sugarcoat it.
Okay.
It talks about things like divine judgment.
Right.
It definitely makes you stop and think about the path you're on.
But it also talks about these mighty incentives
Yes.
for choosing this path of reconnection.
Absolutely.
What are some of those?
Well, you can think of things like a much deeper sense of purpose,
Okay.
real joy that isn't fleeting,
Mm-hmm.
and even the idea that our abilities, our potential as humans
Yeah.
can be elevated beyond what we can currently even imagine.
So we're presented with a choice here. Stick with the static
Right.
or tune into something bigger.
I like that analogy.
It's a powerful idea,
Yeah.
even if some of the details are still a little fuzzy for me.
I think that's the point, though, isn't it?
Okay.
This source is trying to get us to think about these big questions.
Yeah.
Wrestle with them,
Yeah, I can get on board with that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break,
Sounds good.
and we'll come back and unpack this a little bit more.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Welcome back. I'm really interested to dig a little deeper into this whole, born again concept.
Yeah, right. It's not something you hear every day.
No, it's not.
So what does it actually look like to go through this, transformation?
Well, the source describes it as this complete overhaul of our inner world.
Okay.
It talks about receiving a new heart
Okay.
with new desires, new goals,
Hmm.
a whole new way of looking at the world.
So it's more than just like changing your behavior.
Yeah.
It's about like a change at your core,
Yeah.
like the very things that motivate you.
It's like shifting your center of gravity.
Okay.
Instead of everything revolving around your own needs and desires.
Right.
It's about putting God at the center.
Okay, but how does that shift actually happen? Is it just like a decision you make one day, like flipping a switch?
The source really emphasizes that this kind of change
Okay.
isn't something you can force or achieve on your own.
Okay.
It's not about willpower or self-improvement.
So it's more like a
Yeah.
gift.
Exactly. It's described as a work of grace,
Okay.
something that comes from outside of ourselves.
Hmm.
Remember that quote we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God.
Right. The one about needing a new way of understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This new birth, as the source calls it, is about opening your eyes to a whole new dimension of reality.
Okay.
A spiritual reality that was always there, but you just couldn't see it before.
It's like those optical illusions where
Yeah.
you see one thing and then suddenly your brain shifts and you see something completely different.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And once you see things from this new perspective,
Yeah.
the source suggests that your whole life starts to change.
Okay, so let's talk about how this transformation actually plays out.
Okay.
It's one thing to talk about, new hearts and spiritual awakenings, but what does that actually look like
Yeah.
in everyday life?
Well, the source gives some pretty compelling examples.
Okay.
It talks about how your motivations change.
Okay.
Instead of being driven by selfishness or greed,
Mm-hmm.
you start being guided by this desire to serve something bigger than yourself.
So it's about aligning your actions with your beliefs,
Yeah,
about letting your faith actually guide your choices.
exactly. And this naturally leads to a transformation in your relationships.
Okay.
The source really stresses the importance of love, compassion, and forgiveness.
Okay.
All those things that come from a heart that's been touched by grace.
It's about seeing people through a new lens,
Yeah.
recognizing their value even when they mess up.
Exactly. And it's also about extending that same grace to yourself.
Okay.
The source talks about letting go of that guilt and shame,
Yeah.
that feeling of never being good enough,
Right.
and embracing the freedom that comes with knowing that you're fully loved and accepted for who you are.
Okay. This is starting to make more sense now.
Good.
So it's not just about, going to heaven someday.
Yeah.
It's about how this spiritual transformation can actually impact the way we live
Yes.
right now in the real world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about letting that new heart, that renewed spirit, overflow into every aspect of your life.
Okay.
Your relationships, your work, your interactions with others.
Mm-hmm.
It all starts to change.
It's like your inner transformation starts to ripple outward and affect everything you do.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But the source doesn't shy away from the fact that living this way can be challenging.
Right.
It acknowledges that we live in a broken world. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to see those ripples amidst all the chaos.
So it's not about escaping from reality. It's about being a force for good within it.
Exactly. It's about shining a light in the darkness,
Right.
offering hope where there's despair,
Mm-hmm.
and showing grace in the face of injustice. It's a pretty radical idea when you think about it.
It is. It almost sounds like a superhero origin story.
Huh.
Ordinary people get this amazing power from somewhere beyond themselves
Yeah,
and then use it to make the world a better place.
that's a great way to think about it.
But one thing I'm still wrestling with is this whole tension between God's love and his justice.
Right.
The source talks about both, but how do they fit together?
Yeah, it's a question that has puzzled people for centuries.
Yeah.
But I think the source offers some clues.
Okay.
It emphasizes that God's love isn't passive or weak. It's an active force that seeks to restore and redeem.
Mm.
But it also acknowledges the very real consequences of sin, both in this life and in the next.
So it's not like God just ignores our mistakes and pretends everything's fine.
No, the source is pretty clear that actions have consequences.
Okay.
But even when we mess up,
Yeah.
there's always a way back.
Oh,
God's love is always there, offering forgiveness and a chance to start again.
It's kind of like tough love.
Yeah,
Like a parent who disciplines their child because they love them
right.
and want what's best for them,
Exactly.
even if the child doesn't understand it at the time.
That's a good analogy. It's about holding both truths in tension, the reality of judgment and the boundless nature of God's love.
Okay.
And maybe that's part of the mystery, the wonder of the divine nature.
Okay. I can wrap my head around that.
Good.
What's striking to me is how relevant this source still feels, even though it was written so long ago.
Yeah.
Human nature hasn't really changed all that much, has it?
Not really, no.
We still struggle with the same things. Sin guilt,
Mhm.
this longing for something more.
I think that's the power of these timeless truths.
Yeah.
They transcend cultural boundaries and historical contexts
Hmm.
because they address the fundamental realities of the human experience.
Right.
We all yearn for meaning,
Yeah.
for a sense of belonging.
Hmm.
We all want to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves.
And this source suggests that the answer to those longings is found in this spiritual transformation,
Yeah,
in surrendering to something beyond our own limited understanding.
exactly. It's about letting go of our ego, our self-sufficiency,
Hmm.
and recognizing that we need something greater than ourselves to truly find fulfillment.
It's about admitting that we don't have all the answers, that we're not the masters of our own destiny.
Right.
It's humbling in a way.
It is, but it's also incredibly liberating.
Okay.
The source describes it as a kind of awakening and opening to a whole new level of reality.
And that awakening, that shift in perspective, changes everything, right?
It does.
It impacts how we see ourselves and the world around us and our place in it all.
Mm-hmm.
It's about embracing a whole new way of living,
Yeah.
one marked by purpose, joy, peace, and a deep sense of connection.
And that, my friend, is what this born-again experience is all about.
Wow.
It's about stepping out of the shadows and into the light.
Okay.
About embracing a life that's filled with meaning and purpose.
It's a powerful message, and I'm really starting to see how it all fits together now.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
But remember, this is just the beginning.
Okay.
The real journey starts when we take these ideas and start to apply them to our own lives.
So what are some practical ways we can start to live out this born-again experience?
Yeah.
How do we make it more than just a nice idea and actually start to see those ripples of change in our own lives and in the world around us?
Well, that's a great question, and one that we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk about specific ways that this transformation can manifest in our relationships, our work, and our overall approach to life.
All right, so we're back, and we've talked about this idea of being born again as like a spiritual reset button,
Right.
but honestly, it all sounds a bit abstract to me.
Yeah.
How does this actually play out in our everyday lives?
Right.
Does it actually change how we act,
Yeah.
how we treat people,
Well, that's the thing that really struck me about the source is it doesn't leave you hanging with these vague ideas.
Okay.
It gets down to the nitty-gritty of how this transformation should actually impact your everyday world.
Okay, so give me an example. What's something specific that the source mentions?
Well, it talks a lot about motivation.
Yeah, okay.
Instead of being driven by, your ego or what you can get out of a situation,
Yeah.
it's about being guided by a deeper purpose.
Okay.
Imagine waking up each day and
Mhm.
asking yourself, how can I serve something bigger than myself?
That's a pretty big shift in mindset, though. How realistic is that?
Well, the source argues that it's not about trying harder to be a good person.
Right.
It's about those deeper motivations actually changing.
Right.
Remember, we're talking about a new heart here,
Right.
new desires.
Okay.
So those choices to serve, to act selflessly.
And start to feel less like a struggle and more like a natural response.
Okay, so that's one way this transformation might play out.
Right.
What about relationships? Does the source talk about that?
Oh, big time.
Okay.
It really emphasizes qualities like love, compassion, and forgiveness.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about that shallow, I'm okay with you as long as you don't bother me
Right.
kind of tolerance.
Right. Right.
This is deeper,
Yeah.
seeing the inherent worth in every person
Mm-hmm.
because you recognize this shared connection with something bigger than all of us.
So it's those ripple effects we were talking about.
Exactly.
This interchange starts impacting how we see and treat those around us.
Right. And it's not just about being nice to people either.
Okay.
The source also talks about standing up for justice,
Mm-hmm.
fighting for those who are marginalized.
So this isn't just about personal piety.
Yeah.
It's about making a real difference in the world.
Yeah, that's a key takeaway.
Okay.
This born-again idea isn't about escaping reality.
Yeah. It's about engaging with it.
Okay.
Bringing those values of love and justice into every sphere of life.
Yeah.
Even the messy, complicated ones.
That's interesting. It's almost like a call to action,
It
a
is.
challenge to actually live out what you believe,
Yeah.
not just think about it.
Exactly. It's about putting faith into practice,
Mm-hmm.
letting it be the driving force behind your decisions and how you interact with the world.
Okay.
And the source makes it very clear this isn't just about individual salvation.
Right.
It's about bringing those kingdom values, as it calls them,
Okay.
into every corner of society.
What strikes me is that this all sounds a bit idealistic.
Yeah.
The world can be a pretty cynical place. Does the source acknowledge that?
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't sugarcoat the challenges.
Okay.
It talks about, living in a broken world,
Right.
about facing opposition,
Yeah.
about the reality that not everyone will buy into this message.
Hmm.
But it also emphasizes the power of hope, of persevering even when things are tough.
So it's not about naivete.
No,
It's about a kind of stubborn optimism.
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the darkness, but choosing to focus on the light.
Okay.
Choosing to be a part of the solution instead of getting bogged down by the problem.
Okay. I can get behind that.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, all this talk about transformation in new hearts,
Mm-hmm.
it still sounds a bit mystical to me.
Yeah.
How do we know if any of this is actually real, if it's actually happening in our lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the source doesn't offer a simple checklist or anything,
No.
but it does suggest that you'll know it by its fruit.
Yeah.
It's about looking at your life, your relationships, your actions, and
Uh-huh.
asking yourself, is this reflecting the values of love, compassion, and justice that this transformation is supposed to be about?
So it's less about feeling a certain way and more about seeing tangible changes in how we live.
Exactly. It's about those ripple effects we were talking about.
Right.
The source argues that true transformation will inevitably manifest itself in how we treat others,
Okay.
how we approach our work, how we engage with the world around us.
Yeah.
It's not just an internal feeling, it's a lived reality.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
The...
As we've been talking about this, I keep thinking about how this source,
Yeah,
even though it comes from a specific religious tradition,
right.
has a lot to offer anyone who's looking for a deeper sense of purpose, a way to make a real difference in the world.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Whether or not you buy into the whole born-again language,
Right?
the core message of this source is about tapping into something bigger than yourself,
Yeah.
something that can inspire you to live a life of meaning and purpose.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, our shared humanity, and allowing those values to shape how we live,
Yeah.
how we treat each other,
Yeah.
and how we work to make the world a better place.
And those are values that transcend any particular religion or belief system.
No.
They're universal truths that speak to the deepest longings of the human heart.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the depths of human brokenness
Yeah, we have.
to the heights of spiritual transformation.
Absolutely.
And we've explored how those seemingly abstract ideas can have a real, tangible impact on how we live our lives,
Right.
how we treat each other, and how we engage with the world around us.
It's pretty amazing.
I have to admit, I started this conversation with a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit of skepticism.
I understand.
But I'm walking away with a deeper understanding of this whole born-again idea
Good.
and a renewed sense of hope for the possibility of real, lasting change, both in ourselves and in the world.
I think that's the beauty of these deep dives, isn't it? They challenge us to think critically, to grapple with these complex ideas, and to emerge with a broader perspective.
And who knows, maybe they even inspire us to live a little differently, to make a few ripples of our own. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to you listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those truths that resonate with your own journey